Made possible through support from the Arc of Aurora, Arc Thrift Stores, Developmental Pathways, and the Limbaugh Law Firm. A THINK+change training.
Hey everyone, Hani Reilly here with the Arc of Aurora and THINK+change with the fabulous advocacy team of the Arc of Aurora, Jeff, Callie, and Petrie. We wanted to bring you our first VOD pod series of the year and really wanted to focus on love, relationships for people with disabilities. There's a lot of misinformation out there and we wanted to take the opportunity to clear some of it up. But before I get ahead of myself, let's talk a little bit about finding love. Where do you find it? And as a person with a disability, are there things that you should consider?
Well, I'll start it off here. First off, I've heard people ask before, can I be in a relationship? Of course you can, and you deserve to be. That's something a lot of people need to find happiness. And why should you not be able to do that just because you have a disability? So don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't find love, because you can. It's out there. It is your right to be in a relationship. Just make sure that the person is over 18 years old, and it doesn't matter what gender they are. Whatever you prefer is what you prefer, and that is your right to be in a relationship with whoever you want. If people on your team are telling you you can't be in a relationship, that's a good time to reach out to your advocate, and the advocate can help support you in making sure you get to see the person you want to see. One other thing, though, I mean, there needs to be consent. Like, just because you want to be in a relationship with someone doesn't mean they're going to be in a relationship with you unless they also want to be in that relationship. So just remember, it's a two-way street. Now, there's a lot of places you could find love. Some are better than others. We recommend you look for love in some safe places. Safe places could be somewhere you volunteer at. It could be a social group. It could be a church group. It could be a sport league that you're in, or it could just be a friend of one of your friends. But you really need to get to know somebody before you start a relationship with them. You don't just meet somebody and then enter a relationship. The internet, caution, lots of red flags, lots of bad things can happen on the internet because you don't even know if the person you're talking to is the person in the picture. So what you really need to do is get to know that person. There's a lot of red flags, though, like I said. If the person asks you for money, if they ask you for a plane ticket so they can fly visit you, if they ask you for any of your personal information like your bank account or your social security number, you need to stop, not give out that information, and talk to staff or someone you trust to make sure that things are going in the right direction.
Jeff, what if they ask you for like pictures or your address or your phone number?
I was going to say,
I wouldn't. You wouldn't want to give them your address before you actually get to know them. You'd want to meet them in a neutral place before you give out your address. And that's why I would recommend, if you're going on a date, a first date or something, meet them somewhere in public. And
that makes
not
sense.
let them pick you up for that first date, because then you're relying on them to get you back. And you want to have someone you trust to be able to transport you to and from your date or adventure, because you can get in a bad spot if you don't look at more.
Yeah, but it makes sense because you want to make sure that you have some control over the environment. And you know, even if it is a safe situation, you know, if you're meeting someone for the first time, I would bet that everyone here has met someone for the first time that they, you know, wasn't what they expected. And so being able to leave that situation on your own choice is also important too.
Yeah.
Right. And you can even set up a video chat before you
that's a good idea.
person in public, just to see if they are who they say they are, and even would get along with the person. Because if you assess a ride to meet somebody and you weren't going to ride back for 3 hours, you're stuck with that person.
Totally. Well, what happens if you do find a relationship and, like, you know, it's mutual, you've consented, you like each other, you have similar interests? What happens then? You know, like if I lived in a host home, would there be things that I would need to think about?
Right, yes, there are a lot of things to think about. But first and foremost, if you live in a host home, you still have the right to be in a relationship. And if someone's telling you that you can't, that's wrong, and you need to once again reach out to your advocate. I would tell your case manager, get an IDT meeting together to kind of talk about things, because a host home provider cannot prevent you from being in a relationship. Now, there might be some house rules, and you might need to talk about them, but some things you would consider if you're going to have a guest overnight would be, do they have medication? If so, they should be bringing their medication. If they need a ride, you want to work out rides so the person doesn't come to your house and stuck there for 2 or 3 days. So I would always recommend having, if you live in a host home and they live in a host home, have the host homes communicate with each other, and they could kind of work out arrangements for rides, transportation, and then food. If someone's going to stay the day, you might want to let your host home provider know so there's breakfast for 2, not just for 1. There's a lot of things to consider, but I always recommend, if you feel like people are saying no, you can't do it, reach out to the team. And if you don't have an advocate, get an advocate, and make sure your rights are being respected, because you do have the right to be in a relationship.
Yeah. And so it sounds like for so many things, communication is key.
Right.
So, bringing everyone into the conversation that is on your team that you think makes sense to talk about how to navigate being in a relationship and how to make it successful makes the most sense. So
Yeah,
if you get there and then you're like, this is it, this is the one I'm going to marry. Callie, do you know what happens next if you are interested in taking that next step? What are some things to consider?
Yeah, definitely. So marriage in this world is really, really interesting, because you do have to factor in something that we call the marriage penalty, which means that when looking at SSI, SSDI, and Medicaid, if you get married, you're still going to be under income limits and asset limits. Unfortunately, they are not proportional. And what I mean by that is that individually, you have a $2,000 asset limit. So you would think that if there were 2 of you in a marriage, you would have a $4,000 limit.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way. You actually have a $3,000 limit. So it's kind of like saying you each get a piece of pizza, but if there's 2 of you, you only get 1.5 pieces. It doesn't make sense, and it is tricky, but it is something to be mindful of. Now, things can move around a little bit if you're both on benefits or one of you's on benefits. For example, if you're both on Medicaid, you will have a higher income limit of what you can earn. But unfortunately, if your spouse is already working a full-time job, or you guys will have to get together and again communicate and say, okay, are we still under that limit or are we above it? Same goes with SSI. That's where that $3,000 limit comes in. And then if you're receiving your childhood disability benefits through Social Security, that one's tricky too. If you are marrying someone who is receiving any kind of Social Security, that will not affect your benefits. Your childhood disability benefits will stay the same. Let's kind of turn the tables and say that you end up marrying someone who is not receiving benefits right now. That looks a little different. Your childhood disability benefits will go away if that person is working at a job, because that, considers them in the eyes of Social Security to be somebody who is earning a wage from a job.
Sure.
If you are earning SSDI, if you're earning it from your own work record, then marriage will not affect your SSDI. You are in the clear. If it's SSI, your spouse's income and their assets count as yours as well. So you have to remember, it gets a little tricky if your spouse is earning a couple $1,000s a month. That's, again, a talk that you need to have with that person and with your team. Might I also suggest benefits navigators? One of your, any member of your team, or of course your ARC advocate, can always get you set up with a benefits navigator. And their job is strictly to look at all of this information and say, here's where you need to be, here's where you're at, here's how we can play around with some stuff.
Sure. So planning, again, shocker, right? Planning, again, is going to help you make the decisions that make the most sense for your life. But when I think about Social Security and SSI and SSDI, I know that also impacts some of the waivers and waiver services or eligibility. that you might have. And so anyone know what that might do for waivers?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. Basically, it's just a really good idea to kind of have a to-do list before you run down to the courthouse or just kind of jump into marriage. Because like SSI, SSDI, there are some kind of dances you have to do around the waivers too to stay eligible. So basically, it's a good idea to, again, plan, kind of communicate with your team, your advocate, whoever you want to help you navigate this situation. Because you really just kind of want to assess your own income and resources as well as your potential spouse's income and resources. Because that can then actually put you over the Medicaid in terms of income to receive any kind of funding, such as your waiver services. So you can kind of explore what that combined income is going to look like. And then you also can even look for like a buy-in Medicaid if your income might put you over the top, or maybe there's some kind of supplemental or high-risk policy that you can purchase to keep you with services. And then potentially too, if you have a spouse who is working a job, you may be able to then qualify for insurance under your spouse's insurance program at work. So that's an option for you too. And maybe it makes sense to look at a few different other waivers aside from just SLS or the DD waiver to see if, a different waiver might be a little more appropriate for you and your, new situation.
Totally.
So those are just kind of some options to consider.
Yeah. Well, and it's really smart. I hadn't thought about the idea of looking at other waivers and considering Medicaid buy-in as an option.
Yeah.
So sometimes getting into a situation where you have two earners, whether they're through SSI, SSDI, or through employment, could actually be beneficial. It's just a matter of making sure that all of the pieces of the puzzle fit together in the end and that you're getting what you need when you need it seems to be the key.
Right.
Well, you guys, so we're totally running out of time, but I think we should move to episode 2, where I want to talk a little bit about some of these other weird, unique situations that folks with disabilities run into when they're in relationships. So you want to see me on episode 2?
Yeah, we'll meet you there.
All right, guys, see you there too.
Bye-bye.
THINK+change. Talks, trainings, and tools to help in your work for or with people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. Learn more at www.thinkchange.training.